Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Multifamily with the amazing, the one and only Veena Jetti. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
And today we're going to talk about the papers. We got to read our papers before even signing.
Yes.
So what about the private placement memorandum? What is it? And why is it important to look at it?
Okay, so just to be clear about what we're talking about, right? We are talking about if you are a passive investor or if you're a sponsor offering an investment to an investor. That's what your PPM is, private placement memorandum. And what this is this is a document that protects the sponsor of a deal, like myself, and you as a passive investor into my deal, because it tells you exactly what it is. It tells you what you're investing into, what we're going to use the money for, that we are falling under whichever exemption we're falling under with the SEC. We're going to file a Reg D 506C offering with the Securities and Exchange Commission. So all of this kind of spells all of that out. It also tells you as the investor who we are as sponsors. It tells you generally what our business plan is. It talks about any risks there are, which those are usually going to be standard disclosures, right? Like there's market risk, there is uncertainty in the market, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all going to be mainly boilerplate. But let's say that we're going into an asset that has, let's say it's built on an oil well, of old oil well, or an old gas station, which has a fiberglass tank underneath it or whatever, right? That might be a risk because there might be a cost to that. I remember we were closing on an asset once and it was on accident, it was landlocked. So all of the entry points were supposed to be easements by way of public road into the property. But for whatever reason, over the years, someone had forgotten to record them properly. And so they weren't recorded. And so when you look at it as the pure technical way that property is laid out, it's landlocked. There's no way to actually get in. The easement has expired and wasn't recorded. So, I mean, we were able to get it fixed, but that's a potential risk because if you can't technically access your property, that could be a problem. And so that might be something we did disclose it in our PPM documents, like, hey, this is what's happened. This is what we've discovered. We're already working on rectifying it. We know we're going to be able to rectify it, but we want to let you know that this exists there ahead of time. So your PPM document is really for those things. It's the exact agreement and proposition of what you're investing into as a passive investor and what the sponsor is offering you.
And if anything, the sponsor, it gives the opportunity for the sponsor to be totally honest and show to all of those investors that it's good to do business with them because they're actually disclosing everything.
Absolutely. And
you don't
they
want to
should
hide anything.
Now, I will say that this is very dependent on your securities attorney. So we use Nick McGrew out of LA. He's with his company is Polymath Legal, and I've been working with him for well over a decade now. Maybe I'm aging myself a little. I don't know. But I've been working with him for well over a decade now, and he's more on the conservative side. So, for example, this landlock that I was telling you about, some attorneys might have looked at it and been like, okay, that's like a little overkill. We don't necessarily need to disclose that because it's not, these things happen. It's going to be something that gets cleared up before the bank will lend to us. So we theoretically wouldn't even close without it. But he errs on the side of caution. And so he wants to make sure that we're disclosing it just out of an abundance of caution. So your attorney will guide you and tell you like what things are absolute necessary disclosures and what things are like, you can or you should. I recommend it. For us, we were like, well, there's no reason not to do it. And we always prefer to be on the side of more transparency with our investors. So that's why we disclose everything that we think is even possibly relevant.
That's right. And if anything, you can always reach out to multiple attorneys that are within the same real estate business. Because if anything, it's like when you go to a doctor and they give you an answer of like, you have cancer, you're not just going to stick with that one answer. You want to check with other professionals as well. So I feel like it's the same with an attorney, and you could find someone that is more aligned to what you feel comfortable with too.
You can. The one thing I would say about doing that though is if you are reaching out to multiple attorneys to find the attorney that agrees with you, you may be doing a disservice to yourself, right? Because that's like confirmation bias a little bit. What I like is, we work with the same attorney. We've been working with him forever and ever and ever. So we're not going to just go out and change attorneys for no reason. He says no to things all the time because he knows better than we do. Gotcha. So it's a little bit different than like getting a second opinion, because the other problem that you'll run into if you try to do that is you'll have time will get sucked out of your potential to raise. So when we raise capital, we have a very short amount of time to raise capital, and we want to be SEC compliant. So my recommendation is if you are looking to start raising capital, find an attorney, find someone, like for us, it's Nick. And so find your Nick so that you can go, you can call Nick and, bother him like I do and be like, hey, we have this deal. As they get more and more familiar with you, they're going to be able to give you better and better advice, and they're going to be able to protect you better. So if I recommend, instead of out of the gate, yes, shop, find someone, interview people. For me, I like someone who's more conservative rather than less conservative. I want someone who's going to say no when something is not the right way to do it. I don't want someone who's just going to appease me, because ultimately, if it gets challenged or if the SEC asks questions, we want to make sure that we are playing within the rules and that we're in the right, and you do too. So make sure you find someone who really aligns with your value system. More than anything, with securities attorneys, I think the hardest or the most critical component is, one, do they have a system or a process to turn around paperwork quickly to you? Because again, time is the biggest thing in these raises. So one, do they have a system in place? And two, what's their cost of doing it? So are they going to charge you $70,000 to do this, or is it going to be like $10,000, right? So the cost is important. The system is important. And then their ability to answer your questions and give you reasons for why they're advising you do something. So if they tell you, hey, you can't do X, Y, and Z, I wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, okay, fine. I would be like, hey, why? Yeah. And if he says, listen, it's not very clear what the rule is here, but I recommend this out of an abundance of caution, then okay, great. That's what we're going to do. But if they're like, hey, this is a 100% no, then we're going to follow that and make sure we're doing that. So you want to know and understand why they're giving you the advice. And then after you've worked with the same attorney for a while, you kind of develop a relationship of trust, right? So I trust that he's giving us advice to keep us in the rules and in the boundaries of what we're allowed to do, instead of just saying no to give me a hard time. But if he asks you, tell him, I think it's because he's just giving me a hard time.
But it's better to have someone that is pretty much looking at every single aspect of the deal. Yes. Now, when it comes back to the PPM,
yes.
What are some of the things that we should be looking at? If I were a passive investor, what are some of the important things that I should be looking on the PPM?
Oh, that's a good question. So as a passive investor, first of all, does your sponsor have a PPM? That is the big question that you need to find out about first, because a lot of times sponsors are like, I don't really need it, or, oh, I'm not really selling a security. Yes, you probably are if you're raising capital from passive investors. I am not an attorney, but you need an attorney because this protects everybody in the deal. So one is, do you have a PPM? Two, does the PPM have proper disclosures in it? Like, does it tell you what the offering is for? Does it tell you what you're going to be invested in? Does it tell you who the sponsors are? Does it give you the risks of the deal? Does it give you the business plan of the deal? Those are just going to be general things. Now, again, some of it is stylistic in, what fonts are used or how long it is or what's disclosed, what's not disclosed, etc. But it's going to be a long document. I always tell investors that they should read it. Obviously, you want to read something you're signing. Most investors will not. Which, okay, that's your choice, but you should read it. Secondly, if you are going to send this to an attorney to have them review it for you, I always tell investors, do not redline the document. Do not let your attorney spend money or time redlining the document, because we as sponsors cannot redline it. It has to be the same subscription agreement that I give you, that I sign if I'm investing, that I give to my mom, my neighbor, my friend. It doesn't matter. All of those things have to be consistent. So don't spend time or money redlining a document. If you're going to have an attorney review it, just have them review it to tell you what is in it or what's not in it.
Right. And I feel like, and that's a really big takeaway for all our passive investors that are listening to us, because I get it. It's a whole bunch of documents. And if you're a passive investor, you're like, yeah, I actually was trying to be passive, as in the way of like me not doing that much.
Yep.
But if anything, there's always a professional that can help you and review all of those details within that document.
Yeah. And usually once you find a sponsor that you like working with, you don't need to reinvent the wheel and do it over and over and over again. Most of my investors don't have their attorneys review it, because some of them do, but it's all the same document. So there's already been multiple attorneys that have looked at it and blessed it on the deals that we're doing. So it just depends on your comfort level, your tolerance level. Ours are, I like to think they're in plain English. They're really not, because our attorneys insist on putting it in legalese, you know. But it's really there to protect you as a passive investor. It's there to protect me as a sponsor. And it lays out the agreement very clearly between both of us.
Gotcha. And I also heard about another document, which is the operating agreement.
Yes.
What is it, and why is it important to take a look at it as well?
Yeah, so the operating agreement is a document that tells everybody that's a member of the LLC entity how we are going to operate. It tells you who has voting rights. It tells you who owns what. It tells you how you can add or take out members. It tells you how decisions are made. Most importantly, it tells you how profits are distributed. Usually an operating agreement will be an exhibit to a PPM. So it'll be attached and it'll be bundled into one legal document. So you'll have an operating agreement for your entity that you're investing into. It's what officially governs. It's the governing document of how the operations, given the name operating agreement. I know it's clever. So it tells you how the operations of the asset are actually going to work.
And it's interesting that it also mentions how all of these profits are going to be divided between all the investors. Because I feel like that's one of the biggies that all of our passive investors are looking for. They want to see how their assets are going to be performing. And that's a really good way to see it.
Yep.
Now, when it comes to another agreement, which is the subscription agreement, what is that subscription agreement?
So the subscription agreement is usually an addendum to the PPM or a part of the PPM. All it says is, yes, I, as Veena Jetti, I want to subscribe to this PPM, and I want to agree to the PPM, and I want to agree to the operating agreement set forth. So it's really more of like a overarching agreement to the PPM document. So you don't necessarily sign the PPM. You sign the subscription agreement that says, yes, I'm Veena Jetti. I'm an accredited investor. I wish to be part of this. I am signing this as if my name were on the original with every other investor. So it just spells it out clearly. It certifies certain statements like, I am not a bad actor. I have a certain amount of net worth or a certain amount of income, et cetera, et cetera. That's what your subscription agreement is.
Gotcha.
Some people don't have a subscription agreement. You really should, but it's not a deal breaker. So it's not like a
requirement then?
No, it's not necessarily a requirement. Like you can have someone just sign a PPM. Again, I'm not an attorney, so please check with your attorney. They might make you. But usually a subscription agreement is a fairly standard document in
It's kind of like the overarching, yes, I am willing to invest in this deal.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much again for training us on a little bit of all of these documents that are super important to read.
Absolutely.
So please, for all of you guys, passive investors, pay attention to your documents.
Yes.
Better read before signing something.
Yes.
We're going to see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.